be sharing with you and talking about sun safety and also thermal comfort and how shade can help mitigate both extreme heat and UV radiation in young children, and also support quality outdoor play for children. And I'm going to be sharing with you today some research that I've been leading, as well as some ongoing work and knowledge translation activities that we're doing related to this topic. So I did want to acknowledge that this work was conducted on the unceded, ancestral, and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This work took place between 2021 to 2023. The research studies I'll be talking about today, and of course, is ongoing. And I'm grateful to be here today on the lands of the Musqueam peoples, and just reflecting on the beautiful trees that there are here on campus, because you'll be hearing me talk a lot about trees today. So in terms of what I'll be covering, do a bit of background and context setting, talk about the health impacts of heat and UV radiation on young children. I'll be also talking about climate change and how this is exacerbating some of these effects and impacting children's outdoor play. Discussing how to mitigate through shade design, highlight some recent research study results, and then share with you and introduce the Shade Lookbook, which we designed and released just this past May. So in terms of where this work kind of originated, in 2019, BC Cancer, I previously worked with BC Cancer, and we started a SunSafe BC coalition with partners from across the province that were collaborating together to reduce UV radiation among British Columbians. And we really had a specific focus on children and youth because, as you'll learn about, they are more vulnerable to UV radiation and heat. And so this work kind of really sits with that and originated there. In 2021, we went through a strategic planning process and really identified the 4 action areas listed here as areas that we wanted to collectively work on. And items 2 and 3 I'm just highlighting is really where the shade work takes place, looking to strengthen our supportive systems and our environments to create more sun-safe settings, as well as influence policy to look to increase the availability of shade and work with municipalities to influence policy. So in terms of the health impacts of UV radiation, it's kind of surprising for most people to learn that skin cancer is actually the most common form of cancer in Canada when you include both melanoma and non-melanoma forms of cancer. It affects over 80,000 Canadians each year. And children are unfortunately more sensitive to the harmful effects of UV radiation. As few as 5 severe sunburns during childhood can really lead to higher rates of melanoma later in life. And children spend a lot more time outdoors compared to adults, outdoor playgrounds, and that's what we want to encourage. But it makes it even more important to be mindful that we have sun-safe settings for these children to really thrive. And just wanted to highlight here that the good news is that skin cancer is largely preventable. In terms of the health impacts of extreme heat, now transition to a role at BC CDC and looking more at climate change impacts and specifically extreme heat. And this really aligns nicely with the work of SunSafe BC, both looking at UV radiation, but also extreme heat. So, children are more susceptible to extreme heat. They have smaller bodies and are less efficient at regulating their body temperature compared to adults. They're more vulnerable to heat-related illnesses like dehydration, heat stroke, heat exhaustion. It can also worsen existing health conditions and cause death in extreme cases. So this is something, especially with climate change, that is becoming an even more pressing need to think about. So my first poll question of the day, and talking about UV radiation, curious to kind of poll the group to see what the critical protection period for UV exposure is during daytime hours. So yeah, if you want to weigh in there. Is this, schedule? Is this largely for the online folks? Okay. Okay, looks like we have most of the responses up here. And it is 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So that is considered the critical protection period according to Health Canada. And the reason for this, make sure I can advance the slides, there we go. You know, the World Health Organization adopted the UV index to help guide people in terms of when they should be taking sun precautions. You know, anything 3 and above requiring protection. And so that UV period between 11 to 3 here and other parts of the world is really a critical protection period. And so when we are, you know, doing our health promotion messaging, it's really important that we talk about that critical protection period to prevent against sunburn and sun damage. And as well, when we're thinking about shade design, to make sure that the shade that we are designing protects during those periods of the day. So really think about different solar angles and the space that you're designing for. So good job on that. I also wanted to talk about the impact of both, you know, extreme heat and sun, UV radiation on children's outdoor play. I'm doing my PhD with Dr. Mariana Brusoni here, who's the director just on the 4th floor for the Human Early Learning Partnership, and does a lot around outdoor play and researching the importance of outdoor play, because it does have such a host of benefits, from mental health, physical health, cognitive, emotional health, building social skills and play skills. So it's unique outdoor play as opposed to indoor play. There are additional benefits that come from being outdoors. So it is something we really want to encourage young children, because it is so critical to their healthy child development, and really considered an essential building block. But unfortunately, extreme heat and too much sun exposure can negatively impact children's outdoor play experiences. Either, you know, limit the amount of time they're able to spend outdoors, or you know, put them at risk of, you know, different health outcomes like sunburns or heat exhaustion, for example. And you know, as being a young mother, you know, years back, I noticed that, you know, a lot of parks and playgrounds here in Vancouver had no shade for my children to get a bit of respite from the sun. So just one picture here of a park, a really nice park, beautiful there, but such, you know, lack of shade. There's some nice trees in the distance there, but really this is pretty typical to see in Vancouver and actually throughout Canada. In 2020, Standards Council of Canada and Health Canada released a report called Thermally Comfortable Playgrounds. And what they found was that there is a lack of sun-safe and thermally comfortable play spaces in BC and Canada, and that playgrounds do not adequately consider sun safety and thermal comfort in their design. So a real call to look more at this. This is an example of although the play structure has changed, the amount of shade hasn't changed. This is at my children's school. Very little shade there. Another park example here in the city of Vancouver, kind of in southeast Vancouver there. Again, not only do we need to be concerned about the UV radiation from the sun, the direct UV radiation and the heat, but also the play surfaces, right? And the ground surfaces, the rubberized surfaces, the plastic surfaces, which can reach scalding temperatures and actually create burns in young children. So important to be mindful of that too. And some of the, you know, research studies have looked at taking infrared cameras and looking at the different temperature of this play equipment, which can get up to, when I even studied it, and I'll show a picture later, up to 70 degrees Celsius. So very, very hot surfaces. So much so that some playgrounds have, you know, notices like this, that playground equipment is hot, and cautioning children and families about that. And beyond just playgrounds, you know, children spend time in our communities too, and so do, you know, adults. So, you know, we need to think about public spaces as well. This is, I think, near a bus stop. And just the difference, you know, that that atmosphere is on your left and compared to a beautiful tree-lined street that was taken, I think, in LA actually, so not a Canadian example. And it's also important to think about the inequities in terms of urban heat and tree canopy cover. So this is from the city of Vancouver. On the left there, the areas in red show the areas with higher land surface temperatures on a hot summer day. And then on your right, this is a map of the tree canopy cover, and the areas in red with tree canopy coverage under 10%. And so if you kind of superimpose those two, you'll see a lot of the same trends, right, in terms of urban heat and tree canopy cover. So as you'll note too, there are major inequities in the city of Vancouver just with respect to this. So it's really important to be mindful of this when we're designing our shade solutions and trying to address inequities in Vancouver and elsewhere. And climate change is exacerbating these effects. There was a study in 2022 done by Breann, Rosa, that found that an increase in 2.5 degrees Celsius in the annual average temperature was associated with an increase in the number of expected cutaneous melanoma incidents by 21% in a given region. So we're seeing climate change affecting skin cancer rates, and is certainly extreme heat. This was, for those of you that were here in 2021, we experienced a heat dome with temperatures soaring really high, and work done by colleagues at BC Centre for Disease Control found that there was a 440% increase in community deaths during that heat dome. So climate change is certainly really exacerbating these effects and the need to really prioritize this. And climate change is affecting children's outdoor play. This is an expert article that a colleague here at Help Upstairs and I wrote together about the outdoor play and climate change in terms of impacts, adaptation, and opportunities, and really found that climate change is changing the landscape of children's outdoor play. Negatively through several pathways, making play less safe. For example, the play equipment that they're using, being exposed to UV radiation or extreme heat, reducing access to play, so children aren't able to go out outside when the temperatures are too high. And actually, you'll hear me talk about that a little bit later in the presentation today. But the good, there is some good things that we found and a lot of emerging research on, adaptation of play spaces in response to climate change. So I'll be talking about shade a lot today. So, and this is something that in cancer prevention, specifically for skin cancer prevention, we use this mantra of like slip, slop, seek, slide. And most of these, you'll note, are kind of individual behavior change strategies, but the seek is kind of unique in that it is more around environmental design. If we can create these settings that are sun safe, it can allow people to make healthy choices and go find respite from heat inside. So it can be more far-reaching than individual behavior change. By seeking slide, it offers that obvious UV protection, and there is a cooling effect from being in the shade through evapotranspiration, and also, if the sun isn't hitting your skin, you do feel cooler. And there are many economic, environmental, social, and health co-benefits to shade and trees, specifically when you think about natural shade. So we're on to the next poll question now. So approximately how much UV protection can a dense tree canopy offer? So I'll see what folks say here. Okay, I'm seeing the numbers kind of stabilize here. That's great. Okay, well, there's obviously a range, but what we have been able to see in the literature is, that, is it still up, that poll question? Okay, great. That actually a dense tree canopy can offer 90% protection from UV radiation. And there's a bit of a scale, a more medium canopy coverage around 60% and a very light canopy coverage only 30%. So quality shade, looking for those medium to heavy canopy covered trees can really significantly reduce UV radiation exposure. And I'll be talking about this throughout the presentation today, but there are many co-benefits to shade, for example, mitigating the urban heat island effect, reducing air pollution by way of having more trees in our environment, the energy savings that we can cool the cost of, using air conditioning, for example. It can help by mitigating climate change. Trees for natural shade, again, can help with soil erosion, for example, and offer cognitive and psychosocial benefits. There's a lot of research out there that just being able to see a tree really does boost your mental wellness and physical health as well. And there are some kind of mixed reports in terms of physical activity, but I'd say the majority kind of seeing physical activity benefits from more shade. And then why early childhood centers? I know we've talked about the why shade and UV radiation and extreme heat is so critical to address in children. But here in BC, there are roughly 13,000 childcare spaces. In Canada, over half of children under 6 attend a childcare center in Canada. And sometimes this may be one of the few places they actually get outdoor play or access to playgrounds or outdoor spaces. And in Vancouver specifically, they are mandated to provide outdoor play, but only 12 to 20% recommendation for covered outdoor areas in Vancouver. So that may work okay in some settings, but for some that are completely exposed all day long, that's not enough. So now I'm going to kind of shift to talk about some of the research studies I've been involved in, and really, looking back since 2021, and this work and research I've been doing is really kind of implementation research and getting out in the field in real world childcare settings and trying different shade interventions and looking at things in our first study, looking at UV radiation exposure. There's a lot of great work that's been done in Australia, New Zealand, other parts of the world, but very limited in terms of here in BC. So that first study that I'll talk about really looked at UV radiation exposure here at a Vancouver childcare center. And I also had the opportunity to partner with Mariana Brusoni on a research intervention to actually create more shade in early learning centers. So I'll kind of walk you through some of this kind of research in action through to kind of our Shade Lookbook and some of the ongoing knowledge translation activities we're doing. So the first playground I'll quickly talk about to set the stage was a study done in 2021. We worked with the City of Vancouver to select a childcare space that, number one, was like facility readiness. The administrators and early childcare educators were ready for this and had indicated that they really needed this. It was a site with southwest exposure on a second floor story with no surrounding shade. So we worked with our partners both at the city and then at the childcare center, and we're there during spring, summer, and fall seasons. And we did a shade intervention. So note 3 different shade sales here. And we studied in all 3 seasons, kind of without shade and with shade, and collected UV radiation data, so standard erythritol dose, worn with these SED arm monitors. And what we did find was a statistically significant 50% decrease in UV radiation exposure with the shade sales, which I think is expected, but it was really nice to see that data here in BC. But also what it did do is spur a lot of more research questions. I noted on those days that were quite hot, children, especially without the shade, they retreated to kind of corners. They appeared less engaged in play, more lethargic. So that prompted the next study that I'll talk about, but just wanted to touch on a policy outcome from this. Based on this work and the results that we found, we were able to change the City of Vancouver's childcare technical design guides to ensure that any new build now has a hook installed along outdoor perimeter fences to allow for easy install of the shade. The second study, really wanting to understand play behaviors and how, when shade is present, do children change the way they play? Are they more thermally comfortable? So that's what we sought out to investigate in this study. We used person-centered observation behavior mapping, so studied individual children for 10 minutes at a time to really look at how they're playing. This is both pre and post shade. And we used something called the TOPO, which is the tool for observing play outdoors, with kind of a list of 9 different play categories, and we're able to code based on what we saw during those 10 minutes of play periods with different children. And just some quick high-level findings from this. We saw that shade, when the shade was present, it afforded more quality play behaviors. We saw decreases in things in non-play, things like self-care. On a hot day, we noticed children were taking off, putting on their hat, constantly, rearranging their clothing, taking off sweatshirts, or perhaps transitioning between plays. But with the shade, we saw increases in physical play, things like running, biking, and jumping, and increases in exploratory and imaginative play as well. So we saw some really neat changes in terms of types of play that children are engaging in with shade present. And we also asked them about their thermal comfort. After observing them for 10 minutes, we approached the children to ask them if they felt cold, perfect, or hot. And what we did find, again, changes, with the shade, they reported being perfect, much greater. We also used an infrared camera, a thermal camera to take photos of different play equipment in the play space. And here, just to give you a snapshot, this is without the shade. We're seeing temperatures around 56 degrees Celsius, and with the UV canopy net, around 22 degrees Celsius. And so just comments from the educators saying that, it's nice to see kids using the slide after the new shade netting has been installed. They were avoiding different parts of the play space, not able to kind of engage with their settings without the shade. And we also saw this reflected in comparing kind of some maps of their movement patterns. And as you'll note, with the shade, they're back on the slide again and enjoying and appearing to cover more of the space at the site. This was kind of interesting too. This is when there was, I think I mixed this up, sorry. This is when there was, no, this is correct. When there was no shade, we saw that that was one covered area, one of the few covered areas. And so that we saw children spending so much more time just in that little area compared to when there was shade. We saw, and this is just looking at that specific location, but fewer children just congregating and spending time in that space and being able to kind of roam around the space. And we also saw differences in terms of their peer interaction. We saw less solitary play with the shade, increases in parallel and cooperative play. So some really interesting findings that I'm still kind of working through for my PhD thesis, but wanted to give you a quick snapshot of that. And then the other thing I just wanted to, I won't go into detail on this study, but just to mention that I work with UBC School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture students 2 summers ago to do outdoor modifications to 8 different childcare centers here. We went through a process when we talked about solar angles, really looking at that critical protection period between 11 to 3, seeing how the sun is hitting the play space and designing solutions, both built and natural, to support that. One more piece, when we talked about heat and shade inequities, we did conduct a shade equity study using remote sensing. But I just wanted, with this piece, to highlight, we use LiDAR technology, which uses light in the form of a pulsed laser to measure ranges to Earth. And we found this to be very effective. So this really allows municipalities now, or researchers, or people in the field to quickly find out, what the shade availability is for a particular region, and potential to scale up there. And there's many long-term benefits to shade. Investments just in 1 year, looking 10 years down the line will, provide shade provision for 6,360 children. So just investing right now can really pay off in the long run. So now I'm going to get to the point where quickly, I think I got 10 more minutes or so to introduce the Shade Lookbook. So as I mentioned, we had a Shade working group, and they helped to inform the development and the need for this type of document to support both planners, landscape architects, different folks, even schools or childcare operators, to think about different shade ways to integrate shade into their spaces. And worked with the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture here for the natural shade component, which I'll talk about. So we had some overall principles, the Natural Shade Lookbook, which had, I think, around 39 different tree species, plants, shrubs, and vines, as well as the Built Shade Lookbook here. So just in terms of what we recommend with, shade and thinking about shade, to really prioritize natural shade, right? Due to the many co-benefits of trees and natural plants and shrubs. The importance of conducting a shade audit is really critical to really understand how the space is being used, what shade is there already, is there opportunity to move play. If you're a child care provider, maybe you can move play to the shaded areas already. So just get a really good handle on how the space is being used and where the opportunities lie. I talked about the importance of doing a solar analysis, especially between that critical protection period. With heat, I should note, it tends to be a little bit later in the day, typically between 2 to 6, where you see the temperatures being really high. So important to think about that in terms of heat too, maybe even between 11 to 6 or 11 to 5, we want to kind of think about that. In working with the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, they really talked about the importance of dappled light, and I have a few slides to illustrate this, but the importance of just having shade that isn't just a big onerous kind of shade from a tall building, but the beauty and the attractiveness of just dappled light, and that is naturally occurring in trees, for example. The importance of ground and play surfaces and thinking about that when you're designing your shade. The importance of co-design and have people really vested and co-designing with you. Thinking about inequities, and as well, I really like what this group here did in New South Wales, to think about, planting trees at the same time as installing the shade sails. And once trees reach maturity, you're able to remove the shade sails and repurpose them elsewhere. So thinking kind of sustainably and long-term about this. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about why natural shade is just so lovely, not just for heat mitigation, UV exposure, but it really contributes to ecosystems, animals, providing food and shelter for many species as well. It can also help with that climate change mitigation by absorbing carbon from the air and storing it and releasing oxygen back into our atmosphere. It can also help with soil erosion, desertification, landslides by holding the soils together with their roots. We talked about lowering the urban heat island effect. It has this, it can lower this effect in urban spaces. Scientists have found that when done thoughtfully, planting urban trees and enhancing urban forests can lower temperatures by up to 10 degrees. And so in a rapidly warming world, this really, could be a difference between life and death for someone. And this is a study that folks at BCCDC and VCH and I believe UBC conducted, but they saw that if trees shade buildings, they can reduce the cost of mechanically cooling the interior spaces, and the interior spaces are in fact cooler. So that leads me to my third poll question. In this study, they found, neighboring shade decreased the temperatures of indoor buildings. By what degree? What's your guess here? Okay, looks like those numbers are stabilizing. So I'll just end the poll. Most people thinking around 2 degrees. Can you see it now? Okay. Okay. Yes, but what they did in fact find was that households in the most green neighborhoods had a 1.5 degree cooler indoor temperatures compared to the least green neighborhoods. So we are seeing it. I know it seems small, but in fact that 1.5 degrees can actually make quite a difference in a household. Oops. Natural shade too can provide lots of different important play values for children, from climbing opportunities up a tree, using plant parts as play props, arts and craft objects. So since plants change over time and they have unique textures and smells that can really, spark curiosity and wonder in children's play experiences. And there are many cultural and historical values, which we do go into in this Shade Lookbook. They offer, both cultural value and indigenous, historical, and current uses in plants in daily life and for special events. And then, the act of planting can bring people together and just those important social benefits as well. Wanting to touch on some of the key differences between natural and built shade. Natural shade has lower initial costs. Planting tea trees can still be quite expensive, but generally, installing shade, especially if you need to go through permit process or install posts, can be quite expensive, which is why we really, it was important for us with the childcare design guidelines to put the perimeter hooks on outdoor fences and any new builds so that we don't have to go through the process of applying for permits and getting posts installed. So, but with natural shade, there's more maintenance, obviously, with the trees falling and so ongoing maintenance there. Natural shade also has a lower embodied energy. It takes less energy to produce this material or product compared to artificial shade. And since shade is organic, there are few disposal issues compared to built shade. That can be often hard to recycle afterwards. So it's important to think about that as well. I mentioned dappled light earlier, but as you can see illustrated here, just how nice dappled light is, right? It's patches of light and shadow created when sunlight passes through their leaves. And there's been some research to support that natural shade is preferred by people, that dappled light is really preferred in terms of environment for people. And here is just an example. This is by landscape architect Susan Harrington. She took this photo showing dappled light on the street corner versus this is near where she lives, and then just around the corner she saw some shade from a building, and just kind of the difference in the atmosphere there and the effect that it creates. Okay, final poll question. This is kind of a silly one, but can natural shade only offer dappled? Is it only natural shade that it can offer dappled light? Although there is something really nice about dappled light and the way the leaves move in the wind and create this kind of buoyancy feeling. It can be built, and just as an example of the landscape architect students did a really nice job here thinking about dappled light with shade sails and using a torch to create holes in a shade sail and create that feeling of dappled light. So I really like what they did there, and I think it looks quite nice too, the light that different shapes that they use. Okay, and then final couple slides here. In terms of the natural shade that you'll find in this book, and I'm happy to circulate these around the room here, we did make sure that any plants identified provided that heavy or medium shade. So we wanted to offer at least a 60% UV protection, that they're non-invasive, non-toxic, and available for sale in BC. We also thought about listing those native to BC as well as fire-resistant species to survive Vancouver's changing climate. And also included in this is the hardiness zone map. So any plants will identify what hardiness zone they belong into, and that refers to a geographic area with its own range of climatic considerations relevant to a plant's growth and survival. Just one quick example of what you'd find in this lookbook. And I just want to highlight the play value, cultural and ecological value. I think this is really neat, and the students, the landscape architect students, did such a great job really considering the different play values of each species, from the different play props, or perhaps it's the dyes that a certain berry, could provide, to its cultural value as well as the ecological value. So that's just an example of the natural sage section. The built shade, we offer, different examples from shade sails to pergolas to different, awnings, and also combinations of built and natural with vines. But considered here, things around structure and design, installation and maintenance considerations, cost and sustainability. And on the cost piece, we recognize shade can be expensive, so have a list of different funding opportunities as well in this lookbook. So just in conclusion, really wanting to emphasize that not only does extreme heat and UV radiation have direct health consequences for children, but it hinders the opportunity for quality outdoor play experiences, which is so critical to healthy child development. And we need to design and implement shade solutions and heat and sun-safe policies where possible to mitigate against these effects, create environments where children can thrive. And this, of course, requires collaboration between communities, policymakers, educators, childcare leaders, and health professionals like yourselves to prioritize children's health in the face of climate change. I just want to acknowledge the partners that were involved in this work, and my contact information if you're interested in, or have any questions after today. So I will leave there. Thanks.